ancient gods were said to be dead by 361 AD. The altar's smoke had dissipated. The gold was being taken from the temples. The Roman Empire, which had previously worshipped Jupiter, Mars, and 100 other deities, had discovered a new, unique cross to bear. But one man refused to let them go. He was called Julian. He was also the last person you would have thought would become emperor. He was not in the military. He wasn't cunning. He was a quiet, scholarly student who preferred Homer to the military bulletins that kept piling up on his desk and Plato to politics. But what you love is irrelevant to history. History is just interested in your survival. Julian lost his uncle, Emperor Constantine, when he was 6 years old. And in just a few weeks, it's practically all of Julian's male relatives had been killed by the Christian groups at the palace. His brothers by half, all his siblings. They are all gone. Julian was spared. He was not big. He wasn't seen as dangerous. The choice to let the boy live was made by someone, somewhere. In the history of the late Roman Empire, it was the most significant act of mercy. He was sent to study in Athens. It was intended to be a cozy prison that would keep the survivor out of Rome, away from authority, and buried in literature so he couldn't cause any trouble. He discovered the ancient gods, not as legends, not as kid-friendly tales. He discovered them as living concepts in Plato, the mystery cults, and the Neoplatonist instructors who muttered that the old ways were still valid and that the universe was divine. By the time he was removed from Athens and given command of armies, Julian had transformed into something the empire had never seen before. A man with the soul of a pagan priest inside and the purple exterior of a Roman emperor. He was certain of his beliefs. He was aware of what the world had lost. And he was beginning to realize that he could be the only one who could make it right. All he had to do was bide his time. The time was drawing near. In 361 AD, Julian became sole emperor of Rome. His predecessor, the Emperor Constantius, died on the road mid-journey, just as Julian's army was marching to confront him. Some people called it luck. Some called it providence. Julian called it the gods, finally paying attention. He was 30 years old. He had survived a massacre, an education, and 15 years of patient waiting. Now he had the most powerful throne in the Western world, and he knew exactly what he was going to do with it. Julian's first act as emperor was not a military campaign. It was not a tax reform or a new law. His first act was to reopen the pagan temples. He did not delegate this. He went himself. He helped clear the weeds. He helped lift the fallen altars back onto their platforms. He personally performed the ritual sacrifices, the old ones, and the ones that required a priest to know what he was doing, in front of his generals and his court. He believed in what he was doing. That was the thing that made everyone so uncomfortable. He genuinely believed. The Romans had a nickname for him. They called him the sacrificer, not with admiration, but with mockery. He sacrificed so many animals in the first weeks of his reign that Roman soldiers started joking that the cattle of the empire had better start running. His sincerity became the joke. His earnestness became the problem. Because sincerity does not change what people feel, and what the people of Rome felt, in their bones, in the way they prayed, in what they whispered at their children's bedsides, was Christian. The old gods were not waiting to be rescued. They were already gone. Julian tried a different strategy. He made a proclamation. Greek literature and philosophy could not be taught in Roman schools by Christians. He made a rational, almost elegant argument. You cannot teach Homer honestly if you think his gods are demons. You either accept the stories or you don't. If not, move aside. Julian's actions were the coldest he had ever done. And since it revealed that the philosopher had a sharp edge beneath all that knowledge, it worried people in a way that the sacrifices had not. The decree unnerved even Julian's supporters, including pagans who had long yearned for an emperor of this type. Because a temple can be reopened, an altar can be repaired, the sacrifices can be legalized once more. However, You cannot force someone to feel something they no longer do. Julian was beginning to realize that he was not battling a political issue. He was battling a change in human nature. And there's no legislation for that in empires. He required a triumph. He required evidence that the gods were still paying attention, both to himself and to everyone else. Thus, he followed the custom of Roman emperors seeking divine confirmation. He went to war. Julian launched a massive invasion of the Persian Empire in 363 AD, which was the biggest Roman military action in decades. He firmly believed that this was his chance. Julian wanted to surpass Alexander the Great, who had entered Persia and been greeted as divine. He wanted to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the ancient gods existed, that their blessings could still be obtained, and that Rome's destiny was tied to its past. 65,000 soldiers were led into the desert by him. Without hesitation, all 65,000 of them were welcomed into the desert. The campaign started off pretty well. They crossed the Euphrates and moved into Persian territory. They were favored in the early fights. Then Julian did something that caught everyone off guard, including his generals, his enemies, and even the gods he trusted, and he burned the fleet down. Julian gave the order to set fire to the Roman supply ships on the Euphrates, which served as their only dependable escape route. He justified this by saying that the ships were impeding their progress, and that having a way out might make them less determined. One has to go forward when there is no way back. Perhaps even Julian wasn't sure if this was a bold move or an indication that he had secretly lost interest in going home. The Persians had a lot of patience. They realized there was no need to engage in direct combat with the Romans. They destroyed food reserves before the Romans arrived, contaminated their water supplies, and targeted the sides of the Roman army. They let the desert environment and the intense sun do most of the damage. The Roman army began to suffer from starvation as a result, and Julian responded, as he usually did when he was losing ground. He started acting more like himself. When he doubted whether his troops had enough food, he abstained from eating. He rode the full length of the column every day, interacting with regular soldiers, asking their names, and maintaining eye contact. He gave speeches and exuded a fierce energy that his soldiers first mistook for assurance. But it wasn't confidence. Rather, it was the determination of a man fighting on two fronts at once, one against the Persians and the other against his own increasing self-doubt. On June 26, 363 AD, the Roman army was retreating through dangerous and hostile terrain in search of a way back to Roman territory while dealing with dwindling supplies and Persian attacks from every direction. And Julian ended up in a skirmish on the army's left flank as it was retreating. He had removed his armor earlier that day in order to assist a terrified soldier, giving him his breastplate. A spear hit him below the ribs. A Persian cavalryman is credited with throwing the spear in some historical accounts, while cautious writers speculate that a Roman may have thrown it. There is still no answer to this question, and Julian, if he knew the truth, decided not to discuss it. His bodyguard got him off his horse and carried him to a tent. In the Persian desert, the final pagan emperor of Rome lay, knowing full well what would happen to him. Julian's final moments are described in great detail by the ancient historians who documented his passing, because the men in that tent were witnesses and knew they were witnessing a unique event. They described these events in great detail. Julian did not show his rage or beg for forgiveness. He did not call upon Sol Invictus, Jupiter, or any of the gods he had devoted his life to resurrecting. Rather, he made a speech. According to our most important eyewitness historian, Ammianus Marcellinus, Julian discussed how remaining composed in the face of death represents a life lived with reason. He acknowledged his attempts and failures, which are a part of the human experience, even for emperors, and said he had no complaints. Then he asked for some water. He died not long after that. His age was only 31. The most significant aspect of Julian's demise is probably something he never said. Theodoret, a Christian writer, claimed to have captured Julian's final words years after his death. "Thou hast conquered, O Galilean, implying that a vanquished pagan emperor acknowledged Jesus Christ's victory. But the majority of modern historians believe that Theodoret made up this claim. The last pagan, in his last moments, giving in to the Galilean carpenter who became divine, seems too perfect, offering a fitting conclusion to the story. These alleged final remarks are noteworthy because they speak more to the needs of the survivors than to the actual circumstances. Julian had to have said these things because the Christians who followed him wanted the narrative to end that way. They needed the final significant adversary of their new faith to acknowledge their defeat. This suggests that even 30 years after his death, they were still afraid of him. That legacy is truly remarkable. The army crowned Jovian, a Christian general, emperor, a few hours after Julian's passing. Julian had reopened the temples, but they began to close once more. The priests he had appointed returned to being regular citizens, and the sacrifices stopped. It seemed as though Julian had barely existed at all within a generation. The church endured, the Roman Empire carried on, and people's lives continued. Like a river flowing over a stone, history passed over Julian. It briefly veered around him before continuing and smoothing the surface once more. He was not insignificant, though. He was more than a small detail. Julian was more than just a champion. He was the final one to present a strong argument for the other side. The argument itself never completely disappeared, as evidenced by the fact that the opposing side felt forced to make his last concession. Neither paganism nor even Christianity is the main subject of Julian's story. Rather, it examines the effects of a changing world, where the institutions, rituals, beliefs, and stories that once gave life structure gradually lose meaning for people around you. The gradual and irreversible process of people making different decisions every day when they wake up is what causes this change, not conflict or disagreement. Julian could change the law, but he was powerless to change the dawn.